Hello everyone, I'm wearing my new comfy, which many of you included in your Creativity Quest 1 work as an example of the importance of creativity and entrepreneurship. I retrofitted mine a bit, made it a v-neck. I also bought my boyfriend one. He put his on and immediately declared, I'm never taking this off again, even if they make me go back to the office. This made me think about a late March sales report last year, 2020, by Walmart. Typically, Walmart sees a fairly even amount of sales across tops and bottoms in adult apparel. However, last March, Walmart reported a much greater increase in sales of tops, and bottoms actually went down a bit. This makes sense. This was a moment when the majority of the US was locked down. Many of us were teleworking and weren't seen from the waist down. I'm not sure what the future of our work lives are going to look like as more people are vaccinated and the world becomes a safer place to move around in. I'm not sure those of us in office jobs and office settings will experience the same type of work context we've spent much of our lives in. It's really hard for me to imagine people going back to work and working the same ways that we used to. I'm sure that smart marketing and merchandising managers had been paying close attention to telework trends and how telework trends were impacting and affecting consumer purchasing behaviors, especially around things like clothes. But I have a hard time believing that anyone prior to last year was like, oh, we definitely should plan for a context of a global pandemic where a significant portion of the population will be working entirely remote and not wearing pants or wearing pajama pants. That said, one thing I do anticipate is that apparel companies are going to have to trend toward people who have been wearing jammy bottoms for almost a year. We're already moving more toward athleisure and business clothes that had a comfy aesthetic and design, and I think we're definitely going to trend in that direction. Okay, it's week 8. This week we're going to focus on creative processes, and your Creativity Quest 2 remix video is due this Saturday, March 6th, uploaded to D2L by noon. In this video, I'm going to talk a bit about creative processes, daily routines and habits, and the importance of knowing the ways you best work. I'll also preview our week 8 readings, cases, and sparks, and this week is going to set us up well for weeks 9 and 10. We're really going to focus in on brainstorming, ideating, and inventing, none of which you can do unless you're self-aware about the ways in which you best work. In middle or high school, you might have had a poster like this hanging in your classroom. This is a clear, succinct way to represent the writing process. First, you invent or pre-write, you create outlines, you make notes about what you want to write about, then you write, you create a draft, which you revise, and finally edit before sharing. This is tidy, but I don't think it's accurate. Most writers edit across the writing process. Most writers pre-write and invent across a writing task, as I argued a couple weeks ago in class. I created this image for a book I wrote a few years ago, presenting a romanticized notion of the media composing process. Let's say a person is working on a short public service video. We might think she gathers clips, writes a script, selects music, and then sequences these things together. Realistically, though, it's a lot messier than that. When I put together these weekly class videos, I choose the music, I write the script, I revise the script, I edit the script, I rewrite the script, I gather images and I sift through them and figure out what I want to use. I find or rip video clips, I revise the script, I revise the script some more, I record myself, I edit the music, I do some screencasting, I edit the screencasting, I tweak my script, I re-record pieces. This is not a clean linear process, and neither is the creative process. And I would argue there isn't even such a thing as the creative process. If you do a search for creative process online, you'll find images like this and this. You might also come across representations of paths to success like this. And I really like this one because it reminds us that we don't often see the sweat, the tears, the failures, and the hard work under both creativity and success. If you search for creative process, you might find quotes from famous people like J.J. Abrams, who said, "The creative process is a bit like driving in the fog. One often has a sense of one's destination, but the journey may end up taking some surprising twists and turns." And I want to pull our attention back to a quote from earlier this semester by Lyndon Nyman, who said creativity involves two processes: thinking, then producing. If you have ideas but you don't act on them, you're imaginative but not creative. And being creative isn't a magic on-off switch or something that people just magically have. Creativity requires tools, strategies, and steps. It requires a process. Some creative process steps include Charlie Gilkey's 4 steps of creativity: preparation, incubation, illumination, and implementation. Or Jessica Stillman's suggested stages: preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. And verification is, I think, a hugely important part of the creative process. Verification might mean creating or producing some sort of proof of concept, evidence that your idea is viable. Verification might be doing user testing through a focus group or an initial launch of a product or app. Verification might mean formal assessment by an industry group or special consultant. James Taylor offers 5 similar stages: preparation, incubation, insight, evaluation. And I think evaluation here is a pre-step to what Stillman's verification step is, and elaboration. Tiffany Shalane's list is a bit more extensive. 1, the hunch. You think you've got an idea, you're not sure where to go with it. 2, you talk about it, you talk the idea through with people. Then you turn into a sponge and you start sponging up ideas from everywhere to help nurture your idea. Then you build, you create, you make, you do. Then you get confused. Everyone faces a moment in a project where they lose sight of their goals or they question their idea. So you just step away, you take a breather. And then she describes step 7 as the love sandwich, where you fall back in love with and start nurturing your good idea. Then there's the premature breakthroughlation. Many small breakthroughs happen, some stronger or better or more viable than others. You revisit your notes, you go back, you review your processes, and you know when you're done. Those were steps. Part of the creative process has to do with the when and where. And there are some fantastic representations of the daily schedules of the famously creative, like Maya Angelou, the former poet laureate of the United States. Interestingly, she did much of her work in hotel or motel rooms as she traveled and by preference. I have a colleague who, when he needs to get a significant amount of writing done, like an early draft of a book, he'll check into a hotel for like 2 weeks and pretty much lock himself in his room because he can work there without distraction. This is Beethoven's typical daily schedule. And Darwin's a bit more varied than Angelou's or Beethoven's. Tchaikovsky's. And another visual representation of creative processes, including sleep, day job, food, exercise, and other. There are 2 things I find pretty interesting about these. First, they're almost all white guys of the same social class and generally the same time frame, except for Maya Angelou. Second, all these people worked before the internet and the web and social media, and I really wonder what sort of influence these technologies would have or are having on today's famously creative people. There's a great BuzzFeed article by Arianna Ravellini on the daily habits of creative people, and she argues they get moving, but they know when to slow down and take naps. They daydream, they collaborate, they take risks, they make and stick to a routine, they explore, they pay attention, they forgive bad work, they fail forward and learn from mistakes, and they take time to be alone. I was curious, too, to find evidence and examples of how people's daily creative lives and processes have changed in our COVID context. I found a blog piece by a screenwriter, Adam Till, who argued he'd experienced 3 key changes in his creative process. First, he didn't have FOMO, fail of missing out, the way he used to, which used to disrupt his creative processes. When everyone is in lockdown, FOMO isn't as likely. Second, he said he had more time to consider, to weigh, and to analyze. And finally, he said messy lives make for good stories, which I know some of us aren't in a position to recognize because our messy lives are complicated by illness, by unemployment, by having lost a loved one. But I think it's interesting that he addresses the stories we're living and experiencing as part of our creative context and changed daily lives. Looking at the processes of other people is interesting and helpful, but it shouldn't limit us. These aren't the only processes. So I'd suggest 2 things. Recognize your own process and adopt habits rather than focus on a process. What's most important here, I think, is knowing your work habits and embracing creative processes that best facilitate them. For instance, I still keep a paper planner. I use that as a tool to keep track of where I need to be and what I need to be doing. I also have a to-do list saved as a Word doc on my desktop. It's the first thing I open every morning. At the top, I have big deadlines by month, and then I have daily priorities. Now that I live at work, my work day is different, but I try to start work by 7 a.m. I try to be done by 5 or 6 p.m. Along with tools to calendar priorities and keep track of where you need to be when, there are tools for project mapping and project management. One of the most important skills I think you can leave college with is the ability to see the forest and the trees, to see big projects and break them down into manageable parts with deadlines and deliverables. For instance, I worked on a project for the governor's office a few years ago, and we were a huge team. There were reps from the governor's office, folks from 3 different offices at MSU, community member representatives, and reps from an ad agency in Detroit that was contracted for the project. At every meeting, the first thing we do is open a project map on a big screen, and each team would report on their priorities. It was incredibly helpful in seeing the parts of a big moving picture. You can create your own maps and calendars like this one. This is an editorial and a publication calendar for a special issue of an academic journal I co-edited. My co-editor and I launched the project in November 2017, and it was published this past August 2020. This is a project plan a grad student who was working on her dissertation last spring created. She mapped out deadlines by which she planned to send me draft chapters. Those original deadlines were in orange. The revised realistic deadlines have green X's, and the deadlines by which I promised I'd send her a response and comments to her drafts are the blue pluses. Beyond homegrown tables and tools, though, there are great apps out there to help you manage projects. Patio is one. You can see the main tabs at the top: activity, projects, deliverables, and meetings. Proof Hub is another. Here we have a project overview tab, discussions, tasks, calendar, notes, files, time, and timeline view. And what we're looking at over here on the right is a Gantt chart, a way of visually expressing project milestones. Most of the tools provide a view like this, which I think can be really helpful in thinking across projects. Again, seeing the forest. This is in Work Zone, and it lets us see a snapshot of project work. We can see 10% of our current projects are on track, 50% are at risk or close to falling behind, and 40% are in late status. One of the most popular product management tools out there right now is Basecamp.
Hi, this is a quick demonstration of Basecamp. Now, if you're interested in Basecamp, you're probably starting to notice that managing your business just with email chains and file attachments and meetings isn't good enough anymore. Things start to get chaotic and slip through the cracks, and you need some kind of a system to stay on top of everything. And that's what Basecamp is. It's one organized place for your projects, teams, and company-wide communication. Now let me show you how it works. This is a marketing project we're doing right now. Everybody who's involved with the project sees the same thing here. We use the message board to post updates and gather feedback on work that we're doing. This is so much better than messy email chains because you can see the whole story from top to bottom. All the responses are on the record, and it's easy to get back to it. In the to-do section, I can assign work and see what's done and what's not done without having to remind people and nag them for status all the time. The schedule shows important dates and deadlines, and the docs and files is a place for images, assets, and files that we want everyone to be able to find easily. Finally, the campfire is a simple chat room. I use it if I have a question for the group and I'm not quite sure who to ask. This is just one project out of many, each with a different set of people, all organized and running at the same time. In addition to projects, we also have our teams in Basecamp. Customer service, marketing, operations, they all use the same set of tools to coordinate. Finally, we have a place for things that everybody in the whole company needs to see. We call it the HQ. My favorite feature here is the automatic check-ins. This automatically asks a question at the end of the day like, what did you work on today? People answer when they have time, and their answers bubble up to everybody else. This way, everybody knows what everybody else in the company is doing without wasting time on boring status meetings. From the whole company, to teams, to individual projects, Basecamp organizes everything in one place so you can stay on top of it.
And many of us have migrated to Microsoft Teams, which is institutional because MSU has adopted it. We can find anyone in the MSU system and chat, call, or connect. Some faculty are teaching their courses in Teams because Teams actually has an optional course management interface. I would argue now is the time to get familiar and comfortable with these tools because the context of the work world you'll enter will be online and distributed. It's hard to imagine the full impact of COVID right now or what our work worlds will look like in 1, 5, or 10 years, but it will look different and it's going to require different tools from us. I encourage you the next time you're nurturing an idea or working on a project, take some time to reflect on your processes. Think about how you creatively approach a task. Does exercise help get your brain going? Do you work best in the morning, late at night? Do a tool inventory. What things do you have to have at hand to be creative, to work productively? Think broadly. This might be, of course, an internet connection, phone, tablet, laptop, coffee, carbs, a favorite pen or pencil, background music or silence, and more. If you've never done so, I'd encourage you to keep a time diary for a couple of days or maybe even a week. Keep track of where you spend your time, when you're most productive, what tools you lean on, when and why. Getting to know your own daily habits and your own creative approaches to tasks is absolutely key. Then you can turn toward others' advice and ideas about creative processes. And of course, be that human satellite dish and pull in the feed around you. Pay attention to others, especially maybe mentors or people you really admire, managing their time and their projects. What tools do they use? What do they rely on to help them be productive? What do they rely on to help them be creative? We've covered a lot of ground here, but again, the primary focus for week 8 is on creative processes. Our first reading is a chapter by Langdon Morris, Moses Ma, and Po Chi Woo called Cultivating Core Creativity. The second reading is from Asta Cleon's book, Steal Like an Artist. Pablo Picasso is widely quoted as saying, good artists borrow, great artists steal. Or from Cleon's perspective, you don't need to be a genius. You just need to be yourself and seek out the creativity that's around you and take it and remix it and make it your own. Our first creativity case is a short TED Talk by Shinpei Takahashi, where he shares a word game he uses to come up with new ideas as part of his creative process. Our second creativity case is a video featuring, again, Carl Good, the now retired MSU professor I greatly admire, and one of the creativity activities he used to engage his students in focused around divergent thinking and creative processes. We have 2 sparks for this week. One is an illustration-driven animation of a person's inspiration sources and creative processes. The other is a book trailer for a book about creative processes. Explore our week 8 readings, cases, and sparks, and let me know if you have any questions at all as you wrap up Creativity Quest 2 and get it ready to upload on Saturday to D2L by noon.